What's up, everybody? How you guys doing today? Welcome to the channel. My name is Doug, and this is Leaving the Dream. Thank you for joining us on today, the 59th live stream of the channel. Tonight we're going to be talking about police use of force. I want to break it down so that you can understand the basics of police use of force. This is not an exhaustive breakdown. You're not going to learn everything about use of force here, but after this video, you will have a better understanding about what you can expect and how police approach when you either evade, resist, or attack police officers. We're covering this topic now because my next public live stream is probably going to be about the Christopher Dede case with Colin Elderts, and I just wanted everyone to start on the same page. So we're going to break down use of force so everyone knows where we're coming from. First, though, I want to give a big shout out to all my Patreons. I can already see you guys in the chat. As always, thank you guys for your support and for your engagement. You guys are awesome. I'm overwhelmed every week with all the encouragement, and you guys are just great. So if you are interested, though, in the Patreon, come check it out. We deal with important topics. I hope you guys are having fun and learning a lot in the Patreon, because I know I am every single night. You guys are the best. So if you want to join the Patreon, or you're interested in what we do, or you're interested in notable crimes of Hawaii's past or present, organized crime, true crime, or anything at all involving Hawaii, you want to join the Patreon, head on over to patreon.com/Dougkorenic and sign up in any amount. You can find links to that in the description. You can find me everywhere at Dougkorenic. We're doing big things in 2022, and we'd love to have you. So we meet every Monday, 5:30 p.m. Hawaii time. My shout outs today: Raina Amy, Jason Joseph, Noe Sajot, Kavika Kane, T, G Major 7, Kat Higa, Ryan Keala, Pomaika'i Kaili-DeMello, and Alena Kaeo. And of course, I wanted to give a special shout out to my 5 newest patrons: Lianne Yu, Iosefa, Kayla OSullivan, Mandy, and Jolie Stultz. Thank you guys for signing up. We'll see you Monday night at 5:30 p.m. Hawaii time. We just finished up the Honolulu homicide and all the cases that it talked about, all the cases that it featured in every chapter. And next week we start the mailbox conspiracy, the greatest corruption case in Hawaii's history. So go sign up if you're interested in that. As always, all my notes and references can be found in the Patreon feed for all my patrons to take a look at. There's even some bonus photos, so go check it out. Here we go, guys. I'm going to say what's up to everybody in the chat. I got King Eddie. What's up, Eddie? How you doing, bro? Kavehi in the house. Broke Heart Wolf, always coming through. Kai Lyons. That's Patreon fam right there. That's a day one right there. Minority Reporter, how you doing? I got Tupahu. What's up, Tupahu? King Eddie. Nalani Fujimoto. Mikey's. Johnny Walker. And Kari Lee. I think it's Kari. Is it Kari or Kari? I think I asked you that before. Anyway, thank you guys for coming out. All right, let's get into it. Police use of force. Nate Fleming, what's up, dude? Thanks for coming through. Hope you had a good ride, bro. Glad you're safe. We've had a lot of discussions lately about police and how they approach use of force. We've had the SICAP shooting. We've had that Sergeant Waimanalo on that traffic stop that popped up last month. We had the Colin Elderts shooting that we're going to talk about next in the next video. You have national news with George Floyd, and you have the shooting at Burger King, and you had all the Ferguson riots, and you had all this stuff. All this revolves around use of force application as it relates to the police. And that's why we're talking about it. For us to really wrap our head around use of force, we got to understand the major case that governs how we approach use of force in law enforcement. The current law on police use of force goes back to a case called Graham versus Connor. This is from 1989. This isn't that long ago, guys. We're talking 33 years ago. This was a U.S. court decision that ruled that a reasonable police response must be judged from the perspective of a reasonable officer on scene rather than 20/20 vision of hindsight. This is something that I wish that the media and everybody would really grasp a hold of, guys. This is so important. The way that you judge use of force from your living room, that hindsight 2020 use of force, is not at all applicable to how use of force, shootings, or applications are judged in a court of law. They are not even from the perspective of a juror that's listening to the case. Try to wrap your brain around that. It's a hard concept. It was hard for me to get in academy. How we judge an officer's use of force is not based on how the jury or the attorneys or the judges or anyone at home or witnesses saw the event or see the event after the fact. It does not apply. We can only judge a use of force encounter as reasonable based on an officer at the scene, in the moment, in the fight, under the same conditions that a reasonable officer would react. Would a reasonable officer find that use of force justified? That's how we judge use of force. In the United States of America, we judge it based on reasonableness. And it gets kind of tricky because you could talk about the Fourth Amendment or the 14th Amendment. We are going to apply the Fourth Amendment. It's not okay to apply the 14th Amendment, if anyone knows about our amendments. So I'm not going to get too much into the weeds in that. We're going to break this down nice and basic, okay? And Minority Reporter says, what is reasonable? That is the key question that we are going after. So thank you for that question. It was a perfect question. It's exactly where we're going. What's up, Nons? How you doing? Thanks for coming out, girl. Good to see you. One of my day ones, first ever live stream. Nons, this is 59. This is number 59 of public live streams. You've been to every one of them, on top of the 60 or so that we've done in the Patreon. So thank you for that. Okay, let me break down Graham versus Conor real quick. This is an interesting story. So this is story time. Let me just tell you the story of Mr. Graham. Mr. Graham was a diabetic, and that's huge in this story. We're dealing with a diabetic. After feeling the onset of an insulin reaction, he called his friend Barry and asked for a ride to the convenience store. In the Midwest, we say party store, liquor store. He asked for a ride to the convenience store. He was a diabetic and he was having an insulin reaction. Graham hoped to buy some orange juice. Anybody who's diabetic knows if your blood sugar drops, you throw down some fruit juice and it gets your blood sugar up so you don't go into that shock, you don't pass out. He thought that the sugar in the juice would counteract the reaction. After Graham and Barry arrived at the store, Graham got out of the car and ran inside. It says hastily went inside, but you can picture him like scurrying inside, right? Unfortunately, the checkout line at the store was so long and he was so concerned about the wait that he ran back to the car, got in, and told Barry, his friend, to drive to another friend's house. What's up, Sin? Thanks for coming out. So Graham needed a ride because he was going to have an insulin reaction. He asked Barry to come over. Barry brought him to his house, took him to the corner store. He ran in the corner store to grab orange juice. The line was too long. He ran back out of the store into Barry's car, said, drive me to my friend's house. He thought maybe his friend would have some juice. Enter Officer Connor. There was a police officer who was parked outside the store, just being visible, probably writing a report, whatever. Connor had watched Graham run or hastily enter the store and suspected something was wrong. Now, I've been in this situation. I know exactly what that looks like. Imagine you're an officer. You're sitting there, you're trying to deter crime, and you're observing. All of a sudden, this car rolls up on the convenience store super quick. Dude hops out, runs in the store. He's there for like 3 seconds, runs back out, hops in the car real quick. So, Connor watched him run in the store and run back out. Connor followed the two men for a block or so before activating his overhead lights. Barry, who was driving the car, Graham was in the passenger seat. Barry pulled over. He tried to explain that his friend was just having a sugar reaction. But Connor was not convinced. You literally have the driver telling the officer, but he's having an insulin reaction. He needs sugar. And he was telling him the truth. But the officer didn't believe him. Officer Connor told the two men to wait at their car while another officer returned to the store in order to determine what happened. That's good police work. He said, just wait right here. I'm going to have my other officer run to the store, ask them what happened, make sure you didn't steal nothing. That's when things got bad. Graham, the dude who's about to have an insulin reaction, starts having one. Dude gets out of the car. Remember we talked about the traffic stop. We talked about the Lyoya shooting that we saw the other day. My last live stream, I believe. Second to last live stream. If you're watching this later, I'll go ahead and post it. Right here. Okay. So he gets out of the car. Big no-no on a traffic stop. He runs around the car 2 times in a circle around the car like he's going crazy. Then he sits down on the curb and passes out. Backup officers arrived on this traffic stop and Graham was handcuffed. He's passed out for a little bit, right? Handcuffed, picked up, and put not too gently in the back seat of a police car. At this time, Barry, the driver, his friend, and Graham, the guy who passed out, after he regained consciousness, tried to explain that Graham was having an insulin reaction, but the officers did not believe them. And I gotta say, it sounds brutal, but it's not brutal. If you only knew how many times someone probably told them they were having an insulin reaction or were gonna poop themselves on a traffic stop, or I'm having a baby, or someone just died and I'm trying to go to a funeral, like you hear it all. So looking back, we're like, dang, dude's having an insulin reaction. But at the time, dude's acting crazy. And who knew that an insulin reaction would make you run around the car twice, sit on the curb, and pass out? So they didn't believe that he was having this insulin reaction. One officer even commented that he'd seen a lot of people with diabetes before, and none of them ran around the car twice and sat on the curb. In the officer's opinion, Graham was just drunk. Connor finally received the report from the officer who he sent to that store. The officer confirmed that what Barry said and what Graham had said was true. There was no theft. But in the meantime, that dude Graham, whose blood sugar is low, suffered cuts on his wrist, a bruised forehead, and a broken bone in his foot, an injured shoulder, and persistent ringing in his ears. Not necessarily from the police officers. Remember, the dude ran around the car, sat on the curb, and then passed out and fell over. So Graham sues the police officer. But the Fourth Circuit Court that they're a part of dismissed the case based on insufficient evidence that the officers maliciously and sadistically tried to hurt him. And that's important. The Supreme Court reversed the Fourth Circuit decision based in part on the subjective standard. This is where we learn about use of force. It all comes down to this, the subjective standard. Whether the officer acted maliciously or sadistically requires subjective inquiry into the actual beliefs of the officers. How can you prove what an officer believes in his brain? You can't. You can't get in someone's head, prove that they sadistically tried to injure him. Therefore, you can't use that amendment. That's what the court ruled. The Supreme Court remanded the case back to the lower court with orders to judge the officers based on the Fourth Amendment's objective reasonableness test. And that's what we're going to talk about. So Minority Reporter, you asked the question, what is reasonable. Here's what the objective test is, okay? It all comes down to this. The objective test requires the court to envision a reasonable officer. So picture in your mind a reasonable officer. Picture that officer on the commercials, on TV. Picture that officer. Based on the totality of the facts and circumstances, could that officer, that reasonable officer, that good officer that you know, believe that the force was reasonable? When is an officer's use of force objectively reasonable? Since the objective test judges the officer through the lens of a reasonable officer, the subjective beliefs of the actual officer, whether they are good or bad, are not relevant. It does not matter if he's a douchebag. It does not matter what he thought about the subject. What he felt about what he was doing. Like, let's look at George Floyd. What Derek Chauvin thought about George Floyd is irrelevant. So when everyone turned it into he hates black people, that's why that did not affect the case. It has nothing to do with how he felt about him. Because you can't prove it. In court, that doesn't stand up. Officer Connor, this guy, who stopped this diabetic and wouldn't buy his story and thought he was up to no good, and traffic stopped him and made him wait so long that he went into some type of a diabetic response. Made him run around the car twice, fall down on the curb. That guy may have honestly believed that Graham was a shoplifter. But his beliefs about Graham are irrelevant. It is not allowed. The court may not use that to determine reasonableness. It's not about what that officer felt about the guy at the time. It is about what a reasonable officer would feel had he been placed in that same position. So who cares about what that officer was thinking at the time? Take him out of the equation. Just focus on the reasonable officer in your mind. That's why the officer's beliefs on the scene do not matter. Reasonableness had to do with that reasonable cop that you picture in your head. That's the guy who judges this. And that's how the jurors have to put themselves in that position to think, what would the reasonable officer think about it had he been put in the same situation? So the relevant question is whether a reasonable officer would believe Graham was a shoplifter. It's crazy to think about, right? It's literally not what that officer thought. But if I was a reasonable officer and I was sitting there and I watched this dude run it, pull up all quick, heard the tire screech, hopped out, runs inside, and then is there for a few seconds, runs back out, hops in the car screeches out. You're at least like, yo, I got reasonable suspicion to believe that there was a crime afoot. Right? So I think the big point here that we have to really narrow in on are facts make force reasonable. Remember, the relevant question is whether a reasonable officer could believe that Graham was a shoplifter based on the facts, not on his thoughts about the person. Based on the facts that we know happened. Dude pulled up screeching, jumped in the business, ran back out, screeched away. Based on those facts, facts makes force reasonable. So the objective reasonableness that we're talking about, that we're trying to establish here, this test, it requires officers to rely on their senses, what they saw, heard, smell, taste, or touch. And then they have to articulate that in a report based on facts. The facts will determine the reasonableness. That's why you can prove reasonableness, because reasonableness has to do with facts. And guess what? If they're not laid out in court as facts, they're not considered reasonable. They're not even admitted. He has to be able to articulate in court why he did it. So, police officers are restricted to the use of force that is objectively reasonable in light of the facts and circumstances as the officer perceived them at the time of the incident. The information learned after the time of the officer's application of force is irrelevant to assessing the appropriateness of the force used. Okay, let me break this down. Why am I talking about use of force when all this guy did was arrest him? So, arresting someone is considered use of force. It's actually taking away someone's Fourth Amendment right. To arrest someone, that's literally what the word means. It means to arrest their Fourth Amendment right. Everyone has these Bill of Rights, right? We have the Constitution that has the Bill of Rights. These are your rights as a citizen. But when we are arresting you, we are arresting your Fourth Amendment right to search and seizure. It's considered a seizure. You know how you seize someone's car after they're trafficking meth and they're using that car? You're literally seizing their car, their property. Well, the Fourth Amendment, when you arrest someone, you're seizing their freedom. That's how you apply the Fourth Amendment to an arrest. You're actually seizing it. So your Minority Party says it's kidnapping. That's what it is. It's a legal justification to take someone's freedom away. And that's why if you ever find an officer that got in trouble for illegal arrests, they usually will get charged with kidnapping. And kidnapping is not picking someone up, throwing them in a bag, throwing them in your car and driving away with them. Kidnapping is any time you trap somebody and they're not free to go. You compel them with force to stop them from freely moving. That's kidnapping. So you can be charged with kidnapping by locking your girlfriend in a room. That happens. We've had husbands and wives arguing. And the wife goes to get up and leave the room. And he closes the door and locks it and says, I'm not letting you go until we figure this out. That's kidnapping, bro. And if he used force, right? If she's trying to get out the door and he pushes her away from the door and holds the door closed, you got to watch it. And kidnapping is a Class A felony in Honolulu. Doesn't get higher than that. Just murder and manslaughter. So arresting someone is legal kidnapping. It's saying, I'm going to restrict your movement based on my probable cause. So the facts and circumstances related to the use of force should drive the analysis. It's the facts rather than any intent or motivation that you think the officer has. Someone not liking the SICAP kids and shooting them has nothing to do with it. In court, it's about the facts that they can articulate because you cannot prove intent when it comes to a seizure of the Fourth Amendment. All right, so let's move on from that. I feel like I got through that. So, police officers have to use objectively reasonable force. We talked about that. In light of the facts and circumstances that happen, that we know, that we can submit in court. Knowing what we know later doesn't apply. Looking at the Lindani Mayeni shooting, what we learned later doesn't matter. Learning later that it was maybe an illegal Airbnb, learning later that he hadn't taken anything out of the house, learning later that maybe he was going through like a mental breakdown. All these things, guys, they do not matter when judging reasonableness of use of force. It's what did we know at the time? At the time, the officers knew that a lady was screaming for help, called 911, said a dude was in her house. What we know at the time is that when officers showed up, he was still on scene. What we know is that she pointed to him. She positively identified him in a highly dynamic situation at night, in a felony case, a burglary case. When the officers approached him, he attacked them. That's all we knew at the time. And then their tasers didn't work. Their hand-to-hand combat didn't work, and he ends up getting shot. That's what they knew at the time. And in a court of law, you're only allowed to use what we knew at the time from a reasonable officer's perspective. So revelations later about what if he had rented the place the day before? Those do not have any weight in determining the reasonableness of the use of force. And God, that's such an important concept to understand. So, the officer in the situation will be evaluated based on what is considered good and reasonable police practice and whether the officer acted as other reasonable and prudent officers would act faced a similar situation. Here are the three things that are important. Here are the things that you use to determine reasonableness. These are like quantifiable things that you can mention and have a name for. Severity of the crime. Someone speeding is not the same as someone breaking into a house. So the level of use of force that you start at right away already changes. Traffic stop, just officer presence. You're just saying, I'm here, I have a badge, this is my authority, I'm giving you verbal commands. I need you to give me your license and registration and proof of insurance, safety check. But when I show up to a Berg in progress and I open a door and there's a dude standing there, then my gun's out. Can you guys hear me? I want to make sure you guys can hear me. Nalani Fujimoto. Thank you, Nalani. Thanks for the super chat. That's awesome. What a blessing. Thanks, Nalani. That's sweet of you. Okay, you guys hear me good? All right, cool. All right, so number one, severity of the crime. The more severe or serious the offense, the greater the justification for the use of force. Easier to justify use of force, the greater the seriousness of the offense, okay? Number two, the level of the threat of the person that you are dealing with. The more immediate the threat to the safety of the officer or the people in the public, the greater the justification of use of force. So, you show up, it's a severe crime. We're talking assault second. Someone beats some dude with a bat. You show up, dude still got the bat. Those are two of the three things right away. You show up, it's a serious offense, it's a felony. Number two, the level of threat is still great to you or other people because he still got that bat. Right away, use of force is escalated. You have easier time justifying the use of force. The final thing is the subject's level of resistance. So remember, his threat is different from his level of resistance. You show up and he's still got the bat and he's holding it over his shoulder and he's 25 feet away. Yes, he is still a threat. But he's not resisted anything yet. So for an even stronger case, you give him verbal commands. Sir, I want you to drop the bat and put your hands up over your head where I can see them. If he does it, cool. You can already start thinking about de-escalation. You have someone that's still drawn down because you have someone who has their gun out because this dude had a bat. But you have someone else who doesn't have the gun out and is approaching with like a less lethal option, maybe a taser out, pepper spray, handcuffs ready, right? As soon as they get close and it looks like he's giving up, you maybe holster your weapon, you keep the less than lethal on him. If an officer grabs the bat and throws it away, put the less lethal away, you walk in for the arrest. But if he has that bat and you say, put the bat down, he says, I'm not putting nothing down. You're going to have to shoot me today. That changes things. Or if he starts swinging it, or if he starts walking towards you, all these things will affect the reasonableness of the use of force. But here's where this gets interesting, and here's where I want cops like me need to understand this. I needed to understand this more as well. And this is like the hard pill to swallow for a police officer. The use of force doesn't have to be excessive to be deemed unreasonable. That's why there's a difference between unreasonable use of force and excessive use of force. Because there may be a situation, based on the totality of the circumstances, where officers are responsible for deciding if force is needed and the reasonableness of that force to fulfill their duties. This decision should also consider how strenuously, continuously, and repeatedly force is applied. This is so important, guys. Just because the force is reasonable does not make it not excessive. It doesn't have to be excessive to be unreasonable. If another officer, the reasonable officer that you picture in your head, that awesome, prudent, reasonable officer, if he finds it unreasonable, it's unreasonable, even if it wasn't excessive. That's why it's such a complex thing to think about. It is objectively reasonable. Objectively means, so subjective would be like what you're thinking about it right now. Your thoughts about a thing, including your biases and your feelings and your political standpoints, and if you love that person, your experiences, that's subjective. It's what you feel like. Someone else has a subjective idea about the same thing. From their perspective, they're being subjective. But to be objective is to look at it from an outsider's perspective. And so we pick a reasonable, prudent officer, and you say, objectively, what would he think? Not what do I think? What would that officer in that situation, under the same stress, what would he do? So where everything changes, though, is this, what we call dynamic immediacy. The dynamic immediacy of all police encounters involving use of force permit using appropriate force at any moment without attempting or exhausting other options. What that's saying is, I do not have to climb the use of force slowly to get to where I want to be. Guys, I don't show up and first pull out my ticket book. And then when that doesn't work, pull out my OC spray. When that doesn't work, pull out my taser. When that doesn't work, pull out my gun. You are not obligated to do that because of dynamic immediacy. Because you didn't pull up and the guy with the gun first have a knife, or first have a bat, or first have a pen, or first just have a clenched fist. You rolled up, he had a gun, or he had a bat. You don't have to climb. So a lot of people during the Lindani Mayeni case are always saying, why didn't they start off with OC spray? What's up, Pam? Why didn't they start out with OC? They don't have to. It is dangerous for the officer if they have to climb the use of force gradually, exhausting every level. It's too late. They're done. Pow, shot in the head. They didn't have a chance. They showed up. They got to have access to that top tier right away. This is why training is so important. This is why experience is so important. This is why someone who's in good shape is important. This is why someone who can handle themselves physically, aka martial arts, jiu-jitsu, judo, you name it, you pick it. They can handle themselves. They're not scared and freaked out. They know, oh, I'm confident I can handle this dude. Yeah, he's got a stick, but I feel like I can handle him. Where there might be another officer, say my wife, 125 pounds, she's got to shoot the guy with a stick. She might can shoot him with less than a stick. Because remember, the reasonable officer in her position, a reasonable 5'2", 125-pound officer, how would they have responded had they been put in that situation? So besides the subject's resistance and other factors affect a force option as well. You have the nature of the offense. Was it a violent crime? So there's serious crimes, right? Like you have trafficking crystal meth in the first degree, right? That's a B felony. But you also have assault 1. Or you have assault 2. Those are felonies, right? What if you have fraud in the first? What if you, think about this, identity theft. That's a felony. But it's not the same kind of crime as an assault 2nd, which is assaulting someone with a stick or causing substantial bodily harm, breaking a bone. So you punch a dude and you bust his orbital. That's assault 2nd. That's a felony because of the crime, because of the severity of his injuries. Or you pull out a stick and you whack a dude in the head with the stick. That's assault 2nd. It's not the same as punching a guy in the face. But let's say you hit some guy in the face with a stick. That versus identity theft. They're both the same severity or level of offense, but the same sentencing guidelines. But one of them is a violent crime where someone got hurt. The other one is you took some inanimate object from a bank account. Those are different kinds of crimes. That's why severity of the crime is important, but the nature of the offense is important as well. And all these things get added into this soup of objective reasonableness. Picture objective reasonableness as this cauldron of soup that you're stirring. The more you throw into that soup, the more facts you have to determine reasonableness of your use of force at the time it happened, not afterwards. Basically, before the officer writes the report. Guys, it's really hard for an officer to go into court and then say things about how he felt when he didn't write it in his report. Because it didn't happen at the time. All of a sudden you're saying it happened now? Now he's going to have a hard time. That's why the report writing is so important. So you have the nature of the offense we talked about. Size of the subject relative to the officer. Some big 300-pound sole versus this 100-pound Japanese girl. He's 22 years old. She's 39. All that matters from that person's perspective, that officer's perspective. You have the skill level of the subject relative to the officer. I'm telling you, I have written in my reports that if I had to throw down with somebody, that I saw the cauliflower ear on both ears. I saw the stance that he took. Those things actually matter. All these little facts are just more ingredients you're throwing into the soup of reasonableness. So you have gender of the officer and the suspect. Because let's be honest, gender matters. If you are the victim and you defend yourself and you end up going to court, let's say you're not a cop, you just defended yourself, and you hit a guy with a stick because he was coming at you, you better, if you're a female, talk about that in court. And it's not just assumed. You can't just be female and the judge be like, oh, okay. You actually have to say in court, I'm a girl. He was much bigger. He's in his prime. He's much younger. And he's a dude. That has to come out in court or have been written in your witness statement or in the officer's report. You have the physical limitations and relative strength of the parties. What if you're on disability and your back hurts, or you're in a wheelchair, or you're on crutches, or you walk with a walker? Let's say you have a limp. All these things matter. Someone with a limp or in a wheelchair can shoot you for breaking in their house faster than I could. That's just the truth. My wife could reasonably shoot someone way before I could. If we're being objective and talking about reasonableness. Then you have multiple aggressors. What if there's more than one? Dude, just add one dude to the mix. Changes everything. Take a normal dude, average dude, 6 foot, 200 pounds. I'm almost 6 foot. I'm 198. If I'm squaring off on any other dude as a policeman, I better exhaust my physical confrontation options. Soft strikes, hard strikes, baton, OC. You add one more dude, the suspect's brother comes out, comes running off the porch in Papakolea, and I got to arrest this guy on his own front lawn, but his brother comes running out. Guess what? This dude is going to get higher use of force than he would have otherwise. Because in my head, I'm in more danger. I got to make this end quick before this dude comes and gets me. Because I can't watch them both. Man, that changes things, guys. Just one extra dude. I don't care if it's his girlfriend, yo. His girlfriend. 100-pound girl comes running out. Police officers have been stabbed by the wives of the men who beat them up and were getting arrested. All right, Eddie, thanks for coming through, bro. I know officers who responded to domestic violence situations and the man beat up his wife. The officer goes to arrest the man. The wife says, "Don't arrest him, I love him." Officers keep arresting him, pulls out a knife, stabs the officer. The knife hit his calendar, because back in the day, in the 2000s, had calendars. They still may, but it was like a Shopo calendar they handed out every year. You used to write special duty in them and all that good stuff. Had his calendar in his phone. Nowadays, people put their phones in there, but he has calendar in his pocket. The knife hit the calendar. That knife would have went right through that vest. I'm talking about CJ. One of my corporals in police academy in Kikula. So just adding a female to the situation, I don't care how big she is. Now you have two people to worry about. And everybody can use a weapon. Then you got proximity to the suspect. How close was he? Was he in another yard with a fence separating the two of you with that stick? That's much different than him being in the same yard you're in and doesn't have to hop any fences, right? Because you got a quicker response time. Then you have injury or exhaustion of the officer. Here's where police can do better. Unfortunately for the people that get shot, if that officer is exhausted and he's fighting you, he has a greater chance of reasonably using force on you. Higher force. What's up, Leg? Good to see you. Thanks for coming out. So if you're fighting with a guy, there was this one story about a Honolulu police officer. I don't know what district it was. He got into a fight by the beach. This dude's in the water fighting the suspect. Suspect doesn't want to go to jail. He's trying to arrest him. Suspect's dunking him under the water. They're rolling around under the water. 5 minutes. This is North Shore somewhere. Somewhere between Kahuku and Hauula, something like that. If I'm not mistaken. It might have been like actual North Shore, like Haleiwa. But in any case, he's wrestling with this dude in the water. And after 5 minutes, because backup's so far away, he's getting exhausted. There is a certain point at which an officer can shoot a man that he's wrestling with who doesn't have a weapon in his hand. Because you have the water. Think about that. That adds to that element. And then you have probability of imminent danger. How probable is it that I'm getting hurt or someone's getting hurt seriously by what he's doing? The higher the probability somebody's going to get hurt, the higher chance you're going to be able to justify your use of force. And then the final thing is the presence of a weapon or a potential weapon. The key word here is potential weapon. Guys, that video of that sergeant in Waimanalo on that traffic stop, everybody was saying, oh, he beat that guy and that was wrong. When a suspect is hiding his hands from a police officer, that officer has reason to believe that that person has a weapon. Those are the facts. Why won't you show me your hands? Now he's heightened. His sense of awareness is heightened. And it's going to go downhill fast. Cops get killed when they can't see hands. Cops get killed when they can see hands. That's how dangerous hands are. First thing you do is make sure you watch the hands. So those are the important basics about the objectivity. So now all departments vary a little in like their use of force protocols. All I know is HPD, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. So I'm starting with HPD's protocol, okay? HPD, Le Ilima, thank you, Le, in the super chat, 1999. Thank you so much. What a blessing. You're always so generous. Man, I love Le. You're awesome. Thank you. Thanks for the encouragement. All right, HPD says there are 7 levels of force that a person can exhibit to an officer, and we're going to talk about those. Number 1, nonverbal resistance. So nonverbal cues are body language. Clenching of fists, widening of the foot stance, taking off slippers, glaring at the officer, stink eye. These indicate that the subject's attitude suggests an unwillingness to obey the lawful order. So telling the guy he's got to leave the park because it's closed, and the guy's like, and what? Takes off his slippers. Officer, take off your badge. That's real. Happens all the time. Now we've just entered into verbal resistance. So we went from nonverbal cues, taking off slippers, clenching the fists, breathing heavy, stink eye. That's nonverbal, right? Verbal is when there's threats or verbal responses of the subject that indicate an unwillingness to obey a lawful order. And then we have passive resistance. Passive resistance is the suspect's physical actions, usually in the form of a relaxed or dead weight posture. You ever seen someone, whether it's a riot or like a protest or like a parade, and this happened at Holiday Lights in town, in front of Honolulu Hale, where a bunch of people protesting the Ferguson, Missouri, it was like a BLM protest. They did a lie-in or whatever. They laid down in the street to block the parade. But they just laid there. They made officers come pick them up. That's dead weight, when you just do dead weight. A lot of guys will go there and they'll put a lock around their neck, chain themselves together and just be dead weight. That's passive resistance. They don't prevent the officer's attempt to control them, but it requires the officer to increase his physical contact to establish control. And then there's defensive resistance. That's the subject's physical actions that indicate an intent to prevent the officer's control but are not directed at harming the officer. So officer tries to grab him, like in that Lioya video that we talked about. Officer goes to grab you because you're not listening, and you pull away, you yank away from him, and you dig out. That's defensive resistance. You're not trying to hurt the officer, but you're preventing him from arresting you with physical actions. And then there's active resistance. And this is getting serious now. This is the subject physically counteracts an officer's attempt to control the situation that creates a risk of bodily injury to the officer, subject, or others. Or the subject threatens to use force against the officer, self, or others in the immediate area. So when the dude threatens you, now we're talking active resistance. And if he physically counteracts the officer's attempt, so pushing the officer away from you, you're pushing the officer, you're risking hurting the officer by stopping him doing what he wants to do to you. And then active aggression. Here's where it gets bad for you. Active aggression is when the subject assaults or attempts to assault the officer, self, or others. I've had dudes swing at me. I slipped the swing. They never connected. But that was still active aggression. And I have a hard time because the prosecutors always throw that out if they never connected. That's active aggression. I'm sorry, you swing at an officer whether you connect or not. That's active aggression. And the officer can respond accordingly. And then finally, the last one, we have aggravated active aggression. This is the final one. This is the topping on the cake. Active aggression is considered aggravated active aggression is considered aggravated if the assault involves the use of weapons and or techniques or objects which could result in death or serious or substantial bodily injury to the officer, self, or others. So here's the thing, guys. Just because the guy might not kill the officer does not mean the officer cannot kill the suspect. The officer is allowed a one-up situation where you're allowed to advance one level up the continuum. If the suspect is doing something, attempting to hurt the officer in a way that causes substantial bodily injury, that would be breaking a bone or slicing the officer open. So breaking the skin or breaking the bone would be considered substantial bodily injury. Then you have serious bodily injury. And on top of serious bodily injury, you have death. So all it takes is for you to give substantial injury. If what you're doing could break the bone of the officer, you're about to cause substantial bodily injury and he can shoot you. That means a dude punching you in your face, uncontested, 60-pound dude, ex-rugby player, punching you in your face nonstop and you can't stop him. He's about to break your face. Guess what? That's substantial bodily injury. If you can't stop it, if you can articulate how you felt, then that's a justified shoot. And that's why the officers were not hurt, or that's why the officers were not tried for criminal activity from the Lindani Mayani case. All right, so here's a list of force options that the officers can respond with. We just talked about the 7 that you can do towards an officer. Now let's talk about the options the officer has. These are not listed in order that the officer is not required to use them all the way up. This starts with options that have like a low risk for causing injury, and it ends with those that have a higher risk of causing injury, but this is not necessarily the order in which they have to do them. One type of force may belong to several levels depending on how it's used. So you may be able to shoot someone if they're causing you substantial bodily injury, or you may be able to shoot someone when they're causing serious bodily injury or death to you. It also may be found reasonable for you just to do a hand strike, even if the person, after the fact we discover, had the knife or the gun or whatever. At the time, what was your perception? That's what this comes down to. So there are 9 levels of force that an officer can use on a suspect, and I'll go through these quickly. So all these levels of force have to be trained for an officer to use them and be considered justified. But they're all taught in police academy. So we have A, the first one, officer presence. Just you being in uniform with a badge is considered force, which is why an officer has to be careful that he tells people things that are lawful when he's wearing his uniform, because people have to listen to him because he's showing force by wearing the uniform. Number 2, verbal directions. Officers shall, when practicable, give voice directions to elicit voluntary compliance before, during, and after an use of force. Put your hands up. Drop the weapon. Get down on your knees. Turn around. Lay on the ground. Walk backwards toward me. Whatever those are. So you have officer presence. You're there in uniform. You got a badge. Then you can tell them what to do. Verbal directions. Number 3, physical contact. Techniques like light pressure points, light joint locks, physical strength techniques, escorting techniques. We call them escort. So you escort someone to the ground with a light joint lock. You grab their arm behind their back, grab their shoulder, force them to the ground. That's physical contact. Then you got chemical agents. We're talking about OC, oleoresin capsicum, pepper spray. We can also have pyrotechnics during like big events, like riots. They can use flashbangs when they flashbang a house before they raid it. CN gas, OC, CS gas, tear gas. Officers, I got tear gas exposure for one of my riot trainings, and then OC obviously at the academy. Once you've experienced those, then you can use them. You have chemical agents for crowds. You have physical confrontation. Now we're talking strikes, kicks, takedowns, strong grabs, restraint techniques, high intensity joint locks, like arm bars, pressure points, wrestling, whatever your prior training is before you became a police officer. You can use all those to restrain a violent person. We call them empty hand techniques because you don't have any weapons in your hand. Number 6, immediate weapons, conducted energy weapons, CEWs, the taser. Also batons. In Honolulu, they have batons. That's all going to disappear soon. There's no reason for a baton. The baton is stupid. Get rid of the baton. That's something you'll drop and someone's going to use on you. Then you have canine. You have a dude who's canine trained. He's like the handler for that dog. They can use their canine. Then you have less lethal. We're talking beanbag shotgun. It's the big orange one they bring out. Shoots a beanbag. Sometimes they shoot pieces of wood. That's going to incapacitate you. That's going to knock you down, bust you up. And then after less than lethal, which let me just highlight, guys, less than lethal is what it's called. That's probably inaccurate. Less than lethal can still kill you. It just has a less chance. It's a smaller chance you're going to die from the beanbag gun. But if you get hit somewhere vital, dude's got a pacemaker, or hit somebody in the eye or the throat. And then you have the deadly force iron. That's the firearm. We're talking about the guns. Usually, we're talking about a gun when we're talking about deadly. Now, Honolulu has also put the VNR up there. But you could also include a baton. Right? That's why like a baton is considered an immediate weapon. It doesn't have to be used at deadly, but you can use a baton for deadly force. The guy's going to shoot someone and you're out of bullets, and you run up to him, you hit him in the face with the baton, a metal baton, and you kill him. That was a deadly force option with a less than deadly weapon, but depending on how it's used, it could be lethal. That's why this is like a sliding scale. All right, neck restraints at HPD. Chokeholds and similar techniques, regardless if they're a part of the department's training curriculum, are prohibited except when deadly force is justified. This is nonsense. We're talking about the VNR, the vascular neck restraint. We're not talking about a chokehold. We're not damaging the trachea or the esophagus. Nan says, you said volunteer commands by officers. What if a person doesn't want to volunteer, and what is the legal definition of volunteer by the perpetrator? Yeah, voluntary. So I guess we'll get into that. So let me finish breaking this down. So the VNR, the vascular neck restraint, is incredibly useful. And we trained really hard at HPD with the VNR. The HPD removing the VNR was a knee-jerk reaction to the George Floyd stuff because it doesn't look great. That's the bottom line. The VNR doesn't look, it looks like you're choking someone. You're not. Matter of fact, they can breathe just fine. That's the tricky thing about the VNR. Is you breathe fine. You don't know you're about to pass out in 3 seconds. HPD's never had anybody die from the VNR. VNRs are used so rarely. In 2019, it was used 5 times. And if I'm not mistaken, HPD pulled the VNR completely. The last I had heard, it's at deadly, use of force, but it may have been even pulled just because it looks bad. So deadly use of force is force used with the intent of causing or which the person who's doing it, so the officer, knows it will create a substantial risk of causing death or serious bodily injury. Deadly force may be used only when an officer reasonably believes that the use of such force is necessary to defend his or her own life or that life of another who is in immediate danger. You can only use it if you're protecting life. You take one to save one. Take one to save one. That's what deadly force requires. You have to be saving a life to take the life. Or serious bodily injury. So, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the use of deadly force is a seizure subject to the reasonableness requirement of the Fourth Amendment. Even where an officer has probable cause to arrest the subject, it may be unreasonable to do so using deadly force. So, just because the officer can arrest someone does not mean he can kill them if they try to prevent him from arresting them. A very plain example of that would be the old lady at the traffic stop. There was a dude in Fourth Watch. I always heard the story about when I was in Fourth Watch. He got sent to the corner of Ke'amoku and Kapiolani. Everyone runs across the street there. They jaywalk. When they're heading Mackay bound on Ke'amoku from Walmart, heading into Ala Moana Shopping Center, they will either jaywalk or they'll cross when the light is, they have the little walk sign. But a lot of them will continue crossing even when the blinking red happens. Now, in Honolulu, if it's blinking red, you are not allowed to enter the intersection. If you have already started walking when it was there's that little white figure of a walking person. If you enter the intersection and then it starts blinking red, you cannot enter the intersection. It's literally called entering intersection on red signal. Entering the intersection on a red palm. So they'll send officers there from Fourth Watch because so many people do it. And we have a lot of traffic fatalities in Honolulu. A lot of people get hit by a car. So they'll send them there because there's complaints. And it really backs up traffic. Because you're not supposed to enter the intersection. You got to give time for the cars to make that turn. But if you keep entering, they can never turn. Like once every time. Once every light change. So they send officers over there, and this dude stops this old lady because she was jaywalking or entering on the red palm or whatever, and he's a young kid. He just got out there. He wants to cite her. She won't stop. She walks away. He grabs her. She won't stop. She pulls away. She walks away. Dude ends up pepper spraying her. Pepper sprayed the old lady, the tutu. Yes, technically that was not excessive use of force. If you're looking at the progression of how things went, he climbed the use of force. But reasonableness would teach you that there was no severity of the crime. And she was an old lady. You weren't in any danger. He won't get in trouble per se. But it wasn't reasonable. He got in trouble. I don't know what happened to him because that was before my time. But that's just an example. All right, so most of the time when talking about use of force, we're talking about officer-involved shooting. So let's talk about what happens after an officer-involved shooting. Number one, PSO. Heads an investigation of any discharge of any firearm by any departmental employee that either results in or is likely to result in human death or injury. So if the officer shot his gun off, basically PSO is investigating, no matter what. and they know how many bullets you have. You get your gun taken, they test them, they make sure that everything's accounted for. Number 2, the officer shall be debriefed and evaluated for return to duty by the police psychologist within 48 hours, within 2 days. The officer shall not return to full duty until cleared by the police psychologist. That's why there's this 3-day administrative leave period that everyone sees. Whenever there's any officer that shoots somebody, he gets 3 days off. And everyone's like, oh, he's off on paid leave, huh? Well, yeah, he's off on paid leave because it's administrative, because he has to go through this process. He has to be debriefed, tell everyone what happened. He gets interviewed. There's a whole investigation. The psychologist interviews him, makes sure that he's okay in his head, because shooting anybody could mess you up. And then the third thing is the investigative report shall be forwarded to the Department of Prosecuting Attorney, goes to the DPA, to determine if any criminal negligence was involved. It will always be investigated by the DPA, not by the Honolulu Police Department. The report will be written up, a packet will be made, it will be sent on, and they'll investigate. Okay, guys, it all comes down to this. The exceptional circumstance clause. This is really what every shooting comes down to, guys. In situations involving exceptional circumstances not covered in this policy, because this is literally straight from the policy of the Honolulu Police Department, officers should use the amount of force reasonably necessary to protect themselves or others. Officers must be able to articulate the reasons for employing that force. The key here, guys, is there are no perfect answers to your defense as an officer. The Supreme Court stated that the test for reasonableness under the Fourth Amendment is not capable of precise definition or mechanical application. That means there's no perfect answer. Allowance must be made for the fact that police officers are often forced to make split-second decisions, split-second judgments, in circumstances that are tense, uncertain, and rapidly evolving. And while one force option may be better than another, all that really matters under the objective test is whether the force used was reasonable. Not that there were other options. Not that there was one that was better than the other. This was a rapidly evolving event, and he had to make a split-second decision. This is where training comes in. This is why it's so important for officers to train. It's reps, consistent repetition. So in short, what would a reasonable officer say? This is the question. It all boils down to. Did the force fall within the range of reasonableness, or was it excessive and unconstitutional? That's what the jury has to decide, or the judge. Now here's my thoughts, and I'll wrap everything up in a bow. Do I believe police can do a better job regarding use of force? Absolutely. No doubt. I could have done a better job. But you might be surprised where I think they can improve. Yes, I think they can improve by practicing more, having better training. They can improve by having psychological training, verbal judo, these kind of things. But here's where I think I have a practical application. Here's where I can quantify where I think things need to get better. Number one, suspect management. We're talking verbal judo. The better you are at verbal judo, the less you got to use physical contact. I worked so hard. It seemed like every night I was having to arrest or confront someone who had 50 to 100 pounds on me. My partners were bigger than me. And so I couldn't just use my size. Nobody was afraid of me. 6 foot, 190 at the time. Those 300-pound guys, they're not scared of me. So that's where verbal judo came in. It's about respect, explanation, having a heart, telling them, yo, I know you don't want to do this, but this has got to happen tonight. You'd rather have me do it, right? Because I'll take care of you. You want to call your girlfriend? We'll call your girlfriend. You want a cigarette? Let you smoke a cigarette. Whatever you got to do. I'll put in a good word for you with the lieutenant. I'll tell him that you cooperated. Maybe you'll get a low bail. Suspect management is huge. And every good cop that's worth his salt, that's good with suspect management, you literally arresting the guy who at first said, I'm not going to jail. And then you put him in handcuffs, and when you're done, he says, you know what, officer, thank you. I needed this. You're right. You're just doing your job. I appreciate that. I'm sorry how I talked to you. And that happened more often than not. More often than not, people just do it. The verbal judo is huge for suspect management, because what it does is if you can hang out in the verbal judo in the suspect management area, you never got to go into personal management. You don't got to go into the use of force. My next point is personal management. I'm talking about confident decision making. This requires consistent training and drilling. This is where cops can do better. This is where I could have done better. If you drill it enough and train it enough and have scenarios enough, then you'll be more confident. Use words as much as possible. But when words aren't getting you anywhere, use force. But here's the key. When we do use force, guys, when we do use force, it should be done by surprise, it should be done quickly, and it should be done thoroughly with significance. What I mean by that is if you're gonna do it all the way. If you have reached that level where you can use force, don't do it halfway. You're hurting everybody. Because the way that it's designed is that force will stop the encounter now before it escalates. When officers use force apprehensively, when they're questioning themselves, partially making the use of force decision, we're prolonging the incident. We're giving the suspect more time to injure themselves or us. The faster that person gets put in handcuffs and put in the car, the safer everybody is. 2 videos ago, we talked about the Patrick Lyoya case. Remember the guy who was just a traffic stop and he wouldn't listen and he ran and the officer tried to tase him and then he grabbed the officer's taser and the officer shot him? Yeah, the officer was justified in shooting him. The guy wouldn't let go of his taser. And at some point, the officer was getting tired and he knew he was going to lose that taser, and then the suspect's going to have a taser. And when a suspect has a taser, you should shoot him. Why did he take the taser if he wasn't going to use it? So yeah, it was considered reasonable. But here's where I feel like he could have done better. It's easy to Monday morning quarterback, and that's why this isn't allowed in court. This is just my opinion on how we can get better. I'm talking about the personal management now, what you have to be responsible for your own self. If that officer had actually tased Patrick Lyoya, hear me now. If he had actually tased him like he was supposed to when he pulled out that taser, you can see the taser in the video, in the body cam, and he pulls the trigger and the taser misses and is considered ineffective. Well, if he would have tased him the way he was supposed to, Patrick might still be alive today. apprehensive use of the tools that you're allowed to use creates time gaps and gives the suspect the advantage. When he missed him with that taser, the suspect grabbed it, he ends up getting shot in the back of the neck and died. But I'm pretty sure that suspect, who's dead now, Patrick Lyoya, he would have much rather been tased. He would have been incapacitated for 5 seconds. The officer would have got his hands behind his back, would have cuffed him. He would have been in jail. He would have already bailed out, already been in his lawsuit with the police officer, seeing his kids, his friends, his family. There's a 5-second ride from hell, don't get me wrong. It sucks for 5 seconds, but he's alive. So the use of your weapons is important, and if you're gonna use them well and as they were designed, and they will work. And then you gained compliance, and that person went to jail quickly, you're back on the road, and that officer whose life is turned upside down right now would be back on the road the next day. If you pepper spray someone and you miss their eyes, they can still fight or run. And now they're in more danger than they were. Now they're running through the street with one eye closed, but they still got the other one. Or they're just coughing. Or it's burning their face, but they can still see. If you're going to spray them with OC, get them in the eyes, get them in the mouth, get them in the throat. And then Nan says, but the taser was discharged and couldn't refire. It's a spent weapon and no longer usable. Why did the cop think he was still threatened? So tasers are never unusable. Tasers are an electronic weapon. Even after you fire that weapon, that taser's still on and will still give you 50,000 volts. There's 2 types of tasers that are around right now. One of them has multiple cartridges. You fire the one, there's another one behind it. But then there's another type. The one that I was trained with, the one that we had. The one that'll, I'm sure, eventually be phased out and it'll just be the multiple fire ones. And with mine, you fire that cartridge, it's still live, even after it's spent. I could hit it 10 more times and those leads still have 50,000 volts. I could also pull that cartridge off. There's literally no cartridge in it. But there's another cartridge at the bottom. So you can do what's called a drive stun, which is literally where you take the taser and you press it into their skin and pull the trigger. 50,000 volts. Cartridge spent. You shoot the taser, the cartridge goes out, then you walk up to them and you touch them with it while you're depressing the trigger. That's called a drive stun. So it's still a usable weapon. Okay, and then if you hit someone with your baton, but not where we're trained to, or not hard enough, now you gotta hit them again. You know how bad that looks? You hit a dude, it doesn't do anything. We all saw the video of that one cop on the North Shore who's trying to hit that guy on the beach. He's trying to hit him in his thigh because the guy's gonna get arrested and he won't comply. If he would just hit him right, how he's supposed to, and then that muscle is disabled for 10 seconds or 10 minutes, now the guy's arrested, going to jail, he doesn't get hit a bunch of times. If it's used right, it works. When it's used halfway or you don't train with it enough, it's dangerous for everyone. Ask Patrick Lyoya. Cops do need to be better. So does the public. Every time you use your tool, someone's going to critique you and someone's going to be critiqued. I think how we overcome this is, yes, officers need more training, but I never met an officer that didn't want more training. The public needs more exposure as well, but this costs money. Cities all over the world need to spend more money training officers and more money bridging the gap between the police that serve the communities and the communities that they serve. That's the only way we're going to overcome this, is for the public to understand and have the perspective of things that we talked about in this video, and that officers train hard enough out of responsibility for the public that they know, I know when I can use my tools, and when I do, I'm going to use them perfectly. They're going to work, and lives are going to be saved, and then we all win. So on that note, I want to say thank you to all the officers of the Honolulu Police Department who serve that community faithfully on Oahu every single day. I know a ton of them, and they're heroes. So keep up the good work and always strive to be better. I learned that from police officers, so I know dozens of police officers well who love their communities and want to be better. So I hope you guys learned something, because I learned something studying for this. It was fun. It was real hanging out with you guys, and I'm grateful you came to hang out with me. So thank you guys. Thank you to the Patrons who showed up and supported. Thank you for everybody who gave gifts in the super chat, everybody who asked questions and contributed. See a bunch of you guys. Minority Reporter, Tupahu, Me Not You, Johnny Walker. Johnny said, wouldn't it be considered being detained and not arrested? You can be put in cuffs and held during the process of an investigation. Did the officer actually say you're under arrest? Yeah, the officer never said he was under arrest, but he did detain him. And you're right, detention is different. Purple Pigeon, what's up? Thanks for coming out. Alani, thank you for the gift. Sin City came out. Easy 3, 808. Kai Lyons. King Eddie, Pam Santos. Thank you guys. Purple Pigeon said, guys in the 6 foot 190 pounds are the worst. They big enough to hit hard and small enough to move fast. Yeah, you're right. Dang, Johnny Walker said he's 6'5", 225. Thanks, Leigh, for the gift. Habit Lacrosse, what's up? Thanks for coming out. Me Not You said, realize these people are terrified and their cortisol level is spiking no matter what else is going on. Good point. Yeah, not listening to command of the police officer is going to be nonverbal resistance, or could be verbal resistance. That's when it's determined. Thanks for coming out, Nons. You said it's incredibly traumatic if you pull your weapon and shoot somebody. Soldier, officer, civilian, it's a big deal psychologically. You're right. Bigger than people know. Nate Fleming, thanks for coming out. Minority said, Doug, if I was you, I would have had the AR out at all times. I had the AR with me at all times in my trunk. If there was a gun call, I always brought it out. Kai Lyons. 808 Eco Beast. Thanks for coming out, 808. It's always good to see you here in the chat. Aubrey Love. What's up, Aubrey? Thanks for coming out. Thanks for saying hi. I'm glad you commented. I wouldn't have known you were here. Nalani said, Hanaho, hit that like button to support you, Doug. Thanks, Nalani. Yo, appreciate you guys, man. You guys have a good night. Be safe out there. 808 says, went to an affray and I got hit in the head with a baseball bat. Woke up and in my mind, I knew what happened. Just couldn't talk for a while. Damn. I'm glad you're okay. Yeesh. I never got hit in the head with a bat. Doug, I can get you an interview on a prison YouTube channel if you ever want to come over to my side of the tracks. There you go, Minority. We'll set it up. Thank you guys. Mahalos for all the support. You guys are awesome. And until the next time, aloha.